I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today, wherever you may be. I myself am on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to any other elders who may be present today. For those who don't know me, my name is Justine Hazelwood. I'm the Director and Keeper of Public Records at Public Record Office Victoria, and I'd like to welcome you to the second Records Management Network event for 2021. Today's presentations are all by PROV staff, and we'll take you through some of the current programs of work being undertaken here at PROV. Workers continue to progress on various projects despite our staff working remotely for much of the year. But before we begin, I have a couple of updates. As mentioned at the last Records Management Network, PROV is working with the Department of Premier and Cabinet and the Public Records Advisory Council to consider some possible changes to the Public Records Act. Areas under consideration include the roles of the Keeper of Public Records and the Public Records Advisory Council itself, the Head of Public Office responsibilities, permanent record transfer requirements, and penalties for breaches of the Act. We will be continuing that work over next year as well, and at some point there will be more communications about that as well. I also wanted to remind people to keep checking the Record Keeping for Government section of the PROV website. Content is regularly revised and added. If you haven't already done so, make sure you are signed up to receive the PROV Bites e-newsletter. I also wanted to let people know about an upcoming event being held by the Records and Information Management Professionals Association, or RIMPA. They're holding online workshops and training during December, so keep an eye on the RIMPA website for details. Now, let's get started. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please ask them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Each speaker will have time at the end of their presentation to answer them. Please note the chat function is disabled and we won't be answering any raised hands, so please use the Q&A only. All right, let's get started. So first up today, we have 3 speakers from PROV. I hope they actually won't all be speaking together, but one at a time. So sequentially, we have Julie McCormack, who is Senior Manager Government Record Keeping, with David Fowler, Manager Digital Transfer, and Emma Fowler, Manager Appraisal and Documentation. They'll be speaking to you about PROV's new digital archive and relaunch of our transfer program. So welcome, Julie, Emma and Dave.
Thanks very much, Justine. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Dave's going to be operating the slides, so fingers crossed all goes well for me. So my name's Julie McCormack, and my colleagues Emma and Dave and I will be presenting on our new archival management and digital preservation environment and the recommencement of our records transfer program. You may have seen the announcements of the completion of the digital archive program, which has been a key initiative of our Victorian electronic record strategy. We are so very pleased to have completed the work and share with you today what this means for the Victorian Government and community. So to begin, we've framed our presentation around the 3 themes of our VERS strategy. First up, I'm going to start with the new systems we've built. Emma will cover our revised archival control model and what that means for you. And then Dave will cover off the transfer program, in particular, the digital records transfers. First up is the new digital archive and archival management system. So I thought it'd be useful to start with a recap on our role and collection. As you all probably know, the Public Records Act requires PROV to select public records for permanent preservation of state archives. Presently, we hold over 600,000 digital record objects and around 100 Ks of hard copy records created from the 1830s to the present day. And we have another approximately 350,000 digital records queued for ingest. So to manage these records and their context, we have approximately 20,000 record series, 4,500 Victorian agencies and 400 functions registered and described in our AMS. Thanks, Dave. So back in 2015, we received funding to replace our existing digital archive, which was reaching end of life, having been in place since 2005. The vision for the new archive articulated back then was to increase the value and accessibility of Victoria's digital records. And from a very practical perspective, this meant improvements like faster ingest speeds, capacity to preserve larger objects, and a more diverse range of digital records. But at the very beginning, before we commenced, we also took the time to review our archival control model to test whether it remained an effective data model for describing contemporary and historical record-keeping systems. To help us do this, we engaged an archival consultant, Barbara Reid, which resulted in a revised model. It largely aligns with the Records in Context, or RIC model, which has been developed by the International Council on Archives. So this means for us that all records, digital and physical, can be described and managed in the same conceptual framework. Description and management can occur at any aggregation of records, and Emma will be speaking more about that in a little while. Thanks, Dave. So knowing that the requirements of the VERS standard from 1999 were somewhat inflexible, we also took the time to revise them to have a more flexible approach and allow for the capture of a much greater range of records and be liberated from the file record hierarchy requirement of VERS 2. So the current requirements are now specified in the standard PROZ 1905 Create, Capture and Control Standard and its specifications, and we refer to these as VERS 3 for short. So if you hear us refer to VERS 3, we're referring to that standard and its specs. So whilst the new digital archive had to be capable of accepting records compliant with the new VERS 3 requirements, it was also essential that it continued to accept VOs compliant with the older standard from 1999, because we knew there'd been a significant investment on VERS 2 by the Victorian government. But if you'd like, there's lots to say about VERS, but if you'd like more information about mapping the old VERS standard to the new requirements, there's a lot of information on our website. Thanks, Dave. So post the conceptual reviews, we determined that we needed to replace our archival management system, Archives 1, as well as the digital archive, if we were to improve our digital preservation capability to meet the 2015 vision. And concurrently with this, our collection management and access services teams were planning to replace existing business systems to improve the physical management and access to records via the website. So with all this additional work, we had a really big program of work on our hands. So just to recap, these were our objectives with the program. We wanted to remain consistent with the Australian series system and other schemas. We needed to support key business practices, preserve our data asset, be flexible and extensible for future development, allow for faster ingest, and have the ability to accession VERS 3 and VERS 2 digital objects. So here's an overview of the system, bring it all together. This is to illustrate the systems, their relationships and their functional purpose as they were planned. So reading from the left, we have the applications that provide secure storage and preservation of the digital and physical collections. For managing the collection, we have the archival management system, the mothership, if you like, which is integrated with the digital archive ingest and warehouse management and persistent identifier service. And for access, we have a number of applications. It's supported by a new search engine, an API gateway, a secondary asset management system for fast access to digitized copies of records, image viewer, and new request and payment system. And we had the overall goal of facilitating use by the public, government, the research community, and enable us to share our data with comparable institutions like the National Library of Australia's PROV service. Thanks, Dave. So fast forward to 2021 and a whole stack of work. Here are all the components of the environment that we've now built. The new archival management system to support the new ACM. We chose a system called Collective Access, which has been configured for PROV. It's central to the management of the collection. It includes custom modules enabling integrations with other systems, and we have a company named Gaia as our vendor. The Collective Access is probably not widely known in Australia, but it's widely used in North America. It was highly attractive to us because it could be configured to meet our requirements without straying too far from the base code. So we had in mind that we wanted to be able to upgrade to new versions fairly easily. And prior to going live, we migrated all our archival data into collective access. That's all the series, agencies and functions that I referred to at the beginning. So this necessitated a significant amount of work to align it with the revised archival control model. We have a new digital archive, which comprises the ingest, pre-ingest storage and a permanent store to store the digital records. The vendor is a company called Presentient. So we're using DSpace, which is an open source digital repository software, and we have Hitachi storage infrastructure. So prior to going live, we migrated all the records from the old digital archive to the new DA, and the metadata from those digital objects were migrated into the new AMS collective access. We also have a new warehouse management system to track and store the physical records. It's a system known as SC Expert from a company known as Made4Net. It's fully integrated with collective access and other systems. It will be used to generate barcode labels for those doing transfers of hard copy records. We also have a persistent identifier service for our collection entities. We're using the handle system to enable consistent management and access across systems over time. SAMS is our repository for serving the digitised content and open access born digital records to users with additional contextual information about the collection. The system that we've implemented is Fedora Commons repository software integrated with Gooby digitisation software. It has an image server and viewer embedded on the website and with website search and browse interface, I should say. We also have an updated website for external stakeholders to directly query and access metadata about the PROV collection. It comprises a new online catalogue for our archival documentation. It's driven by a Solus search engine that indexes the collection metadata and enables search, and it's complemented by enhanced record ordering features and services. We've also implemented the new API gateway, which I mentioned earlier, and the environment is completed by an identity and access management system that manages user access permissions. Thanks, Dave. So just to finish off very briefly, this is an illustration of the environment. It's a mix of on-prem for the pre-ingest environment and secure storage for the digital records there on the left in red. Whereas we're using a PROV secure protected level AWS environment for our data about the collection, which is the boxes in yellow and green. So that covers off the DAS ingest, the archival and warehouse management data, and the user data. And we've got a PROV secure public environment for the digitized content stored in SAMS, the website, and the public search on the right. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Emma, who will present on the revised archival control model. Thanks, Emma.
Hello, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So as Julie's already touched on, I'm going to go through our new archival control model and our new metadata properties that we've also introduced. But before I start, I thought it would be best to first provide you briefly with an overview of our previous archival control model that some of you might be familiar with. It was based on the Commonwealth Record Series system developed by National Archives of Australia. It was implemented by PROV from the early 1980s, but has evolved over time. The notion of the record group, for example, was added in the late 1980s. And from that, the concept of the functions evolved during the 1990s. So I've got an image of the model up there. Some of the problems that we had with the model, I mean, with anything, it needs to evolve over time. It was hierarchical in nature, reflecting the traditional file record structure of the 19th and 20th record keeping systems. It was difficult to describe records that may exist and have meaning in multiple contexts. It did not readily support the capture of metadata schema from agency information systems, nor additional metadata for example, geographic location is an example, which would permit Victorian records to be described in a national or international context. In practice, there's been a blurring of intellectual and physical control concepts such as consignments and units, and they've sort of become embedded in our archival description practice. So this is our new model with colour there. So our new model, it's been designed to be flexible and hierarchical, and not hierarchical, I mean, which with much more focus on relationship between entities rather than the hierarchy. The revised model provides flexibility of description of entities and their relationship whilst remaining grounded in Australian archival practice. It aligns with standards, has a structured metadata scheme, which will enable PROV to share the data, as I mentioned before. It represents records consistently, irrespectively of whether they're digital or physical. And it's backwards compatible with our existing archival documentation asset, and has been designed for gradual uptake. It conforms to the ASNZ 5478 Australian and New Zealand record keeping metadata set. That is, the underlying principles, terminology and meaning is aligned with the standard, and it's been adapted for the PROV remit. We've had to make various adjustments to meet our requirements. Being standards-based, we hope to be able to share and exchange metadata with other organisations relatively easily. We have implemented 3 entities, and as you can see from the model, there's record, what we call record, function and agent, with multiple subtypes within each entity and greater emphasis on the documentation of the relationships between and within the entities. We've removed record group, consignment, unit and sub-item as part of what was in our previous model. Consignments, however, will still exist for management purposes. So agencies will still be transferring consignments of records to us. So you'll be hearing the term consignment when you engage with us on your records transfers. But the consignment will no longer be part of our intellectual model. The revised model allows records description for both physical and digital record items within the same archival management system, unlike previously where our digital record metadata was maintained in an Oracle database separate to our previous archival management system, which was Archives 1, that was our previous system, and replaced by Collective Access, which is Julie has just mentioned before. It will permit additional metadata, such as an alternative agency title name, to be captured for agency entities. So we have the capability to capture, also known as agency names or another name that an agency might be known as. For record items, we have really expanded upon our descriptive and management metadata we can capture, including being able to store additional metadata packages from agency systems. Metadata that we previously captured at the consignment level, we're now capturing at the item level. So for example, the disposal metadata, access metadata, we're capturing that at the item level. The model also permits the documentation of relationships outside the archival control model, user-generated content and access copies of records, which would be stored in our SAMS, the Secondary Asset Management System. And importantly, a benefit of the new model that further entity types that may be added over time without having us to rethink the entire model. So this is just providing you with further detail of our new entities and subtypes. So under record entity, we have, people might be familiar with record series and record item, the 2 subtypes of record. Agent, primarily the agent is agency, everyone would be familiar with, but that's the administrative unit of government. But the revised model allows us for additional types of entity to be registered a document, and that may include person or mechanism. For example, a mechanism be like a red light camera. We haven't implemented that just yet. We've got that in our system, but we haven't got an example of that. But person, for example, may be used for creating a person as a recording agent, which would be useful for small quantities of personal papers that we do receive occasionally. but it enables us to capture the provenance more precisely. And then there's the function entity. The function is defined as the major responsibility of government and may be linked via relationships to agent and records. I'll talk about that soon. And in addition to the entity type function, we'll also have the type term to allow us to, for existing terms to be migrated and help us provide a thesaurus of approved function titles. So this diagram here just provides, this model replaces greater emphasis, as I've mentioned before, on the documentation of relationships. And this is just a bit of a snapshot of the different relationships for each. I won't go into them in too much detail, but you can sort of see we can relate sort of many different ways. Now I'm just going to provide you a bit of a like a demonstration of the entity relationships. Credit to Julie, who's done most of this research for these presentations. So and this presentation. So I'm just going to go through. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of commencing with the function known as botanic gardens. So I think everyone's very familiar with botanic gardens, which we've given it we've registered in our system, and it's VF27, Victorian function 27, which commenced in 1851. The model allows us to document the relationship with other functions. In this case, other functions that are related to botanic gardens include Crown Lands, Public, Crown Lands Government, Survey and Observatory. So these are all functions that we've got registered, and they're all related because they're related to botanic gardens. And within each function, there's a description of what that function meant and covered. So just going to click. Sorry, it's a bit of a moving slide here. So now, agencies. We can then move to the agencies which have had some administrative responsibility for botanic gardens over time, describing both the time frame and the nature of the relationship, commencing with, so because botanic gardens dates back, from the function of botanic gardens dates from 1851, as you can see, there's been many different agencies that have been responsible for botanic gardens over time, and we just thought this was a good example of providing our documentation framework. So there's Colonial Secretary's Office, Colonial Secretary's Department. I won't go in through, but you can see the different departments over time. I'm just mindful of the time as well. And then I'm just going to relate here the record entity relationships and how they relate to the functions and the agencies. So from here, the record entity relationships, the record series and their controlling and temporal relationships, whether it be through their original record keeping system. So we have registers, indexes, files, documents, and then containment relationships, the record within the records and the items, whether they be files or documents, so physical or digital, and we'll be able to capture description of records at more levels of aggregation and make them available. And the new relationship, as I mentioned in our model, we're allowing for the relationship of function to record series, which is new, which we didn't do before. So we thought this was a good example. This diagram just is going to digital. This diagram illustrates a record entity for digital records mapped to the model, allowing us to capture descriptions of records, one single digital preservation package containing 5 record items, all of which will be described in the archival documentation and related to other records and their context. So it's a bit of a technical slide there, but another really important thing that we've been doing is enhanced description. The new ACM and metadata properties provide enhanced description capabilities. It's possible for us to capture the meaning of the original record keeping and descriptive data. For example, we can give meaning to dates, like admission, like we can not just saying an item has a date, we can say it's the admission date, it's the receipt date. We can give meaning to the data, which is good, so that'll be enhanced over time. Any level of description is now possible. We can also be able to describe for example, photographic photos within an album, so we can provide that level of lower level of description that we weren't able to before. Obviously, as Julie's mentioned, we've done a lot of migrating and mapping of our existing data into these new properties and transforming it. But however, there's obviously still gaps, and it'll be a work in progress over time. But we're optimistic our new approach will set us up well for the future. And new records transfers will first be described under the new approach. So that's something for everyone to be, we will be introducing you to all these new processes. But we'll also be working on projects over time to enhance our existing data. And just finally, before I hand over to Dave, I just wanted to say, just explain, why completing the transfer forms is we ask agencies to complete the transfer forms when undertaking transfer, and why it's so important. The forms and record description listings provide us with the key archival descriptive data that we capture into our AMS, which in turn is published to the online catalogue. The series report form, the 21B, provides such key information to enable us to describe the records. And we are hoping our new model and descriptive practice will aid the discovery of these records over time. So now I'm going to hand over to Dave, who will talk you through the next start of the phase.
Hi everyone. So yeah, Dave Fowler here, Manager of Digital Transfer Program. And I want to talk to you today about the recommencement of the PROV transfer program, and in particular, the digital records transfer program. And if we've got time, I will just like to touch on the practical steps involved in transfer as well, but not to worry if we don't get to that, because that information is all available on the website. So we are recommencing transfers finally after a long layoff. I think since 2018, we're back. So, and I'd like to stress right at the outset that we are still very much accepting physical transfers. Even though I'm talking today about digital, physical transfers are still very much part of our business. So, but we are wanting to renew our focus on digital records, not least because we now have a whole new suite of systems to support digital transfer, but also because digital records could very well be at risk. So there's no denying that there is a risk to digital records now, for the usual and well-known reasons, technological change, loss of support, systems falling out of support, and so forth. I think everyone would be aware of those issues. And what we're really wanting to do is move towards a situation where digital transfers are seen as business as usual. So try and remove all the mystery and complexity, whether that's real or apparent, and get to the point where a digital transfer is just a routine part of business. And a good example of this is the work we're doing with the Cabinet Office and the departments to routinise the annual transfers of Cabinet CIC records. And the signs are very encouraging so far. With the Cabinet Office and the departments have undertaken a lot of work to make transfer of digital records happen on an annual basis, with interruptions from COVID-19 and what have you taken into account there. And we're also interested in exploring the transfer of more complex business systems, looking at, archival preservation solutions for those systems. So we've got a whole new suite of systems in place now, and we've got an enhanced ingest capacity, and as we saw earlier, an enhanced ability to accurately represent digital records in our archival control model. So we're really looking to get moving on digital transfers and just getting them into the regular part of agencies, of the agency's transfer program. But I will just stress once again that physical transfers are still very much accepted, and we just want to make sure that people are aware of that. So what's on now, and just on the screen there is a rundown of what we've got on at the moment. Just wanted to give you an idea. So we've got a lot of ground to make up from the layoff during development of the new digital archive, and obviously disruptions from COVID-19. And just to put things in perspective, in terms of the numbers of records on hand at the moment, it's around 3, awaiting ingest to the digital archive. It's around 3/4 of the total records we've ever ingested to the old digital archive, going back to say 2005, 2006. It's actually higher than the figures we quoted earlier in the presentation, because we've just received some things since that was in the last week or so since that was written. So it's a lot of records to get through. And we're going through a period of, I guess, of consolidation and also exploration of just what we can do with the new system. So I just wanted to get that point across, that we're back. We're obviously going to need to do some work with people to schedule and prioritize, and because of the backlog we've got. So I'm conscious of the time, and I can click through the closing slides because they're really about the practical steps involved in transfer. I just wanted to reiterate that the transfer process as a whole at a high level hasn't changed, but at a more granular level, you'll notice some differences. And I would expect, an enhanced ingest capacity would be one of those key elements. So all this information is on the website, and it's easily obtained there. So if there's any questions, we can pop them into the Q&A, and we'll endeavour to answer those as the morning progresses. So just to point out once again, so we've got a well-defined and tried and tested digital transfer process, and we're looking forward to getting started again. And that's it for me. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie, Dave, and Emma. As mentioned, pop your questions in the Q&A and they will be answered. And I know a few people have asked about slides being made available, and they will be sent out. So, so slides will be available to people. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker. We are now going to hear from Peter Francis. Peter is the manager of our standards and policy area, and he'll be talking about work he's been doing with Microsoft Office 365 and functional specifications for record keeping. So welcome, Peter.
Oops. Thanks, Justine. I had my wrong presentation set up. Yes, so we're thanks everybody for joining. We're delighted to be able to let you know that a piece of work we've been collaborating with other Australasian archival authorities has been finally approved by the peak body CARA a week or so ago, and that's in the process of being approved for publication on CARA's website. I'll provide a link to that, I believe, at the end of this presentation. But I thought it'd be a good opportunity to, because we're having the RMN, to give you a quick walkthrough about what we're aiming for with that paper, and encourage you to access it and start working with it. Right, so the document was produced by a working group of CARA called the Australasian Digital Record Keeping Initiative, which involves all those member institutions across Australasia, and it focuses upon the digital record keeping aspect. It's done a lot of projects over the years, and you can visit CARA's website and also see some of the output from that. PROV was heavily involved in a software as a service paper that was published on that site only last year, and I recommend that to you as well. So it's a collaborative piece of work, which means that it is generally useful across all those jurisdictions, and I'll get to what we'll be doing in Victoria towards the end. But essentially, clearly, 365 has been occupying the minds of anybody with responsibilities under the Public Record Act or similar legislation around Australasia. the rollout has been quite rapid, not entirely unexpected, but certainly very rapid, and the adoption rate is so high that it certainly has been on our radar for a number of years now. There's also, over that time, we field a lot of requests for information and do our best to support agencies in those areas. And the most frequent question has been over the years, is 365 compliant? Now, without being cute about it, that's actually a very difficult question to answer, because 365 doesn't lend itself to being assessed as a product, if you like. It's in fact a very complicated environment. It's delivered as a service, so it's ever changing. That's one of the reasons people purchase products like that, is that they maintain the current code all the time. It's highly dependent on the license that you've bought and the features that you've got in that and how you utilize them. It also depends upon how you've configured it. And because it's changing all the time, it clearly, the point in time you're wanting to assess whether it's compliant will always be, you'll be getting a different answer, because the system will change. And then, of course, ultimately it comes down to how you run it. And when you're actually assessing whether the record's being managed well, it comes down to actually the portion of that ecosystem, that complicated ecosystem that the records are in, and what those records are, because it always comes back to that. Sorry. Anyway. I'll continue. So yes, highly dependent, as everything in our world, on what the information is, and everything should flow from that. The requirements, unsurprisingly, we set about to pool our resources, and these requirements have been derived from the requirements set by all the member institutions. In turn, those member institutions have heavily based their own requirements upon the main standards that are in our domain. And so when you actually get hold of the document and have a look at it, you shouldn't actually find any big surprises in there, and that's as it should be. We've also supplemented the requirements with, as I said, the recently published SAS paper. So for a quick, this is a very quick glance, if you like, overview of the product. We've come up with about, I think off the top of my head, about 47 requirements. They have been, we thought it was useful to perhaps group them under particular principles. And so there's detailed descriptions of principles within the document, and then those requirements flow on. Naturally enough, some of those requirements will actually belong in several places, particularly ones relating to metadata. So we've picked the best place to put them, but it's really just to help you get your head around what's going on. When you have a look at these few samples I've got on the screen, our goal hasn't actually been to answer the question, is M365 compliant? Instead, what we've gone for is to provide you something concrete. What is the bar? What are the expectations? What are the requirements? And the organisation can and should then determine whether or not what they're seeing in the particular product or system they're looking at is achieving those goals. And as far as PROV and all the other institutions are concerned, if you then, in order to fix any gaps in your performance, if you use additional products, or if you even use human intervention, if you like, putting procedures in place, those are essentially all legitimate ways of meeting the goals. At any given point in time, one organisation which is using 365 as a basis for some of their record keeping may be using a combination of different configurations and different products within 365, and also third-party products to achieve their goals. That same organisation 5 years down the track, as long as they're still achieving their goals, that actually might look quite different. They may have changed their product choices, and they may also have different capabilities within 365, which they have either chosen not to use, or they've moved their controls over to those. So it's very much a shifting thing, but we want these to be something consistent. a bit of a measuring stick, if you like. Similarly, another principle here, you will actually come across some of these requirements which in a stricter sense actually aren't functional requirements. And so if you laid all 47 of them out in front of a system implementer or a vendor, they might quite correctly point out that these actually aren't all technically functional requirements. We acknowledge that. What we didn't want to do was to, one, pull out some requirements and isolate them somewhere else in this document or somewhere else. And therefore, if you like, we thought break the integrity of the end-to-end requirements because they weren't strictly speaking functional, but also acknowledging that what today reasonably might actually have to be met through procedures or governance structures and the like, in the future actually might be implemented within a system. And so we didn't sort of, it gave us the freedom not to draw a technical bar through some of these. If you're using this as the basis for developing a market approach, then we'd absolutely strongly suggest go through there, and you might find many of these very useful for including in your spec, but also acknowledging that you might find some actually are really about how you manage the product when you've got it in place, and so therefore you feel free to take them out of your spec, but we want them to be there. When we sort of lose a little bit of control when we put these out in the world, and we don't want people to selectively take a portion of a document, if you like, and use it, but perhaps leave out some of the incredibly important governance factors. So once again, this comes back to what I opened with. It's really difficult to assess a product such as 365 because it's made up of many products, and it's a forever shifting target, if you like. But also, if we produced a tool for assessing 365 on its own, then to a certain extent, that's actually very limited in its application to you. So what we wanted is we wanted a set of requirements that were written in such a way that you could apply them to any system that's managing records. And you'll find that all of our guidance generally, when it talks about a system, it is broad. It's talking not about a product generally, it's talking actually about this is what your record keeping system must be doing. So you want to draw your boundary around when you're assessing something that's using 365 around everything you're doing around that product, including any integrations, because what we care about is performance and outcomes, and we're not so hung up on the products that you're using for that. As long as you can actually demonstrate that you're performing, that's really what matters to everybody. We also wanted something that was not dependent upon you doing an implementation in a particular way from the outset. We wanted you to be able to definitely use this when you're doing procurement. We also wanted you to do it during implementation phases, but also in ongoing management and in changes to your system over time. And definitely when you're getting changes to any of the products within 365, if a particular part of the product gets deprecated and another one comes in to take its place, we'd want you to be able to go back and run the measuring stick over that again and work out maybe what you were depending on to meet your requirements in that deprecated product, and then identify how you could, meet that in some other way or through the replacement product. So definitely we wanted something that wouldn't get broken as soon as you actually expanded the system or there were changes to the product offering. We've also wanted it to be usable by a very broad audience. So definitely if you have responsibilities for records and information management, we definitely think this is for you. We hope you'll find it useful. We also want it to be something that you wouldn't have to heavily modify if you're wanting to have a conversation with potential implementers or vendors. So we've done our best effort to try and take out language which may actually be more exclusive to the discipline, but equally some of that is slightly inevitable. We will, if we find any glitches in understanding them, we'll actually put remedying that in our products as we go forward. As I said, the product's going to be published, I was hoping it'd be up by now, but in fact, it'll be published very shortly. on CARA's own website. So there's a link to that. And you actually might find some other products of interest there, such as the SAS paper and other things that PROV's been involved in. As I said, what we're going to do now with those requirements is we'll certainly point to them from our resources, but equally, we're going to set about repackaging the requirements for the Victorian public sector. So what that means is essentially where we can, we'll link it to our standards and specs, and we'll also link it to OVIC and any other operators in this jurisdiction who have a relevant role. So it'll be a localized version that you'll find hopefully more useful to you. We're very, very delighted to work with you on any aspects of this when you're coming to implement it, because clearly when you get down to tin tacks and start using it, you might identify areas of it that could be improved or sharpened up, and we'd love to hear about those. And so your experiences are really interesting in this too. But yeah, we'll put out a blog post, I think, when the paper's published, and we'll keep you in touch. But otherwise, yeah, reach out to us if you've got an interest in this work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. Again, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A and we will get through them. Okay, we're now joined by Alison McNulty. Alison is Senior Manager Standards and Policy, and she's going to be talking about the review of our Public Record Office standards and specifications. So welcome, Alison.
Good morning. Hello. My name's Alison McNulty, and as Justine said, I lead the Standards and Policy team here at PROV. So today I'm going to give you a brief outline of the review which is being undertaken of PROV standards and specifications. So the background, the progress, and the next steps. So as I'm sure you're aware, the Public Record Act gives the keeper the power to set standards, which are mandatory for Victorian state and local government public sector agencies. The head of each of these public sector agencies is responsible for ensuring that these standards are met. The Public Record Act defines records as being any documents within the meaning of the Evidence Act. So the definition is very broad, covers all formats and records created across the enterprise in all sorts of systems. So databases, emails, social media communications, audio and visual records, to name a few. So the standards need to apply to a wide range of agencies and many different sorts of records. So to give you a bit of a background, there was a major project around 10 years ago to develop a comprehensive set of standards, specification and guidelines. This was a huge accomplishment, which I know some of you are involved in. So it was a really sort of major step forward. In 2016, we surveyed agencies about the quality and usability of the standards, and the feedback was that they were very detailed and useful, and that the quality was generally high, but that they did need to be reviewed and updated. People reported that it was confusing to have one set of record-keeping standards and another set of standards attached to the Victorian Electronic Record Strategy, known as VERS. Also that there were too many documents and too many requirements. Another issue that was raised was that the standards were easy to apply to hard copy records and to records held in EDRMS, so digital records held in EDRMS, but were actually difficult to apply to business systems. So to overcome these issues, it was decided to undertake a major review of the standards, specifications and guidelines. And the aim of that review has been to ensure that they can be used by all of the public sector agencies which are covered by the Public Record Act, that they can be applied to all formats and systems across agencies, that they can be understood and used by all sorts of people, so written in plain English without sort of jargon, that they set the benchmark for good practice, but are achievable and realistic, if an appropriate amount of focus and resourcing is given to record keeping within agencies. So somewhat aspirational, but aspirational if the proper, but achievable if the proper resources are actually given and priority is given to record keeping. Another thing we were trying to achieve is that they were really focused on outcomes. So rather than being very sort of prescriptive about how to achieve, that they actually set the outcomes that were desired. And that the standards and the requirements were measurable where possible so that they can be used for assessment and reporting. So progress so far, 6 of the 7 standard areas have been reviewed. This has resulted in 6 standards being reduced to 5, with the merge of the capture standard and the control standard into a create, capture and control standard. The VERS standard and the record keeping standard were also merged into one, or record keeping standards were also merged into one set of record keeping standards. So one sort of framework that people needed to apply rather than having the 2. Formats have been simplified and the repetition reduced. So the standards now contain principles and requirements, and specifications are now only developed when detailed technical requirements are needed. For example, for digitisation requirements, for metadata requirements, and sustainable format requirements. So this has resulted in there being about 1/3 of the number of requirements and documents. So we're hoping that means that they're easier to use and apply. This work has all been done jointly by PROV and the members of advisory groups, which were established to review the standards. And the input and work that our advisory groups have done has been incredibly valuable. So thank you to all of those who have been involved. So the final standard, the disposal standard, is currently being reviewed by PROV and the advisory group, which has been established. So drafts will be published for wider feedback and communicated via PROV Bites, our e-newsletter, and social media channels. So please keep an eye out for them and please provide your input. We're interested in getting a really wide range of input and everybody's ideas. So we're working through that, and the aim is for the new disposal standard to be published by the end of 2022. I mean, it'll probably be before that, but we're giving a fair bit of time because we really do want to get to a lot of consultation and get a lot of feedback. As part of that, we'll work out what sort of specifications are needed and what sort of guidelines are needed and start to produce those as well. So after the disposal, the review of the disposal standard is finished, then we're going to commence a review cycle. So one of the 6 standard areas will be reviewed every year. Then in the 7th year, we'll review the overall framework and formats. Our aim is to keep the standards and associated products current and usable. So that's a quick sort of brief outline. We'll have more information available on our website, and there's the link there. We'll also be sending out communications as drafts are developed. And again, as I said, really wanting to get people's feedback. So if you've got any questions, please put them into the Q&A sort of function, and I'll try and answer them today while the rest of the session sort of happens. If we don't have any, if I don't get to them, then I'll respond to you afterwards. Also, please feel free to email me if you have any more specific sort of questions, and you can see my email details there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Again, just a reminder, any questions, pop them in the Q&A. Okay, we are now going to hear from Peter Francis again. Peter is joining us with examples from our record keeping assessment tool reports and how agencies can use them to improve their record keeping. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Justine. So this presentation is a very short one, and it's kind of it presumes you've hopefully had some exposure to the RKAT, but we do provide a demonstration of the RKAT in earlier RMNs, and so those recordings are available on our website. And we'd encourage you to try it out if you haven't tried it out already, to visit it. Also, if you are wanting to use it, or you've used it once and you want to ask some questions, get in touch with us, please, because it's something we're keen to help you work with, and we want it to be useful for you. We're currently in a phase of reviewing what we've got in place for the RKAT, and we're wanting to put through a set of fixes and also improvements to it in the coming 12 months. And so we're very keen to work with anyone who's worked with it to any degree. It's as interesting to hear from people who've used it extensively to find out what's good about it, but also it's important to work with people who've had experiences with it where it's not quite working for them, or they don't quite understand how it's fitting into their organisational management of records. So this is something that we want to continue to develop, and the whole thing's based upon it's got to be usable and useful to your organisation. So very keen to have a dialogue with anybody who's up for it. The goal of it is it's a tool of the agency that they can proactively assess and document and continuously improve their management of information. And we believe it would enable this consistent structure. Means that you can use an assessment across a whole range of different activities across the organisation at a whole range of different scopes, and enables you to actually organise that into a consistent structure so that you can measure and, importantly, we believe demonstrate to others within the organisation and externally improvement over time. And we emphasise that RKAT's free for anyone to use. If you're doing it on behalf of your agency, then we pick that up and through your email address who you've come from, and also when you submit in an official capacity. And so we have a sorting process in where we will ignore anything you put in an unofficial sense, and we'll also weed out anything that's come from an external party who's not part of, if you like, our world. But yeah, it's free to use, and so we encourage people to try it out. Certainly anybody who's interested in just understanding record keeping, we're very happy for them to use it too. We regard it as a public good. So on getting reports, if you've gone through and done an assessment and answered all the questions in the assessment to the best of your ability, either on your own or with colleagues, we certainly recommend it being something you might workshop with subject matter experts in the organisation. When you get to that point, the final page will allow you to make a decision to either submit it on behalf of the organisation or just submit it for testing purposes only. And it's important to understand the distinction between the two. We've altered things slightly from when it was launched, but essentially the submit for the organisation means just that. You've got to the point where everybody's happy with it, and you've decided that you wanted to preserve this one as your record of assessing that business unit at that point in time, or a system at that point in time, or any of the other scopes. Pardon me. When you click that submission button, you then get access to a summary report of your assessment, also a full report, which as it says, basically rolls out pretty much everything you put into it. It also provides you access to a CSV file that you can download. So essentially you get all your raw data out of that in a consistent structure for that single assessment. The intention of it is that when you click submit for the organisation, it finalises, and so we don't encourage you through the interface to go back and make further changes to it down the track. You'll find you don't have access to that. However, we've implemented an undo, if you like, from our end of things. So while you can't actually open up a formally submitted assessment, if you contact us because simply you hit the wrong button, or you actually, in retrospect, you've painted the wrong picture for yourselves when you've gone through and done the assessment, get in touch with us, because we actually have the capability to go in the back end and unsubmit an assessment for you, so you can return to editing it. Okay, so it's not as final as it used to be. Yeah, so we hope that it's no longer a barrier to you doing a formal submission. The button for testing only, when you get to the end, but you feel that you want to maybe even do a bit more work on it, but you've got to the end, we want you to be able to get the reports out, because that might be a useful thing for you to have further discussions towards finalising that submission. So if that's useful to you, that's great. We're very happy about that. So what it means is clicking testing only means you get all the benefits, I guess, of getting the reports out of it, but you can continue going on and editing it until you actually have come to the positions and finish documenting it the way you'd like to. Okay, so that's the state of play, if you like. If you haven't seen them before, the tests are fairly straightforward. They try to give you a bit of a heat map, if you like, across the different areas that you've responded to in the assessment. And as I said, they really do give you just essentially what you've put into it. So we find these useful. We hope these are useful to you. We want to do further work with these over time, and hopefully we might make some tweaks to them in the next 12 months. Clearly, as I said at the beginning, this is one of those things where with feedback from you on how you're using it and what works for you and what you'd like to see in them, we'll certainly take any of that on board and do what we can to make these more informative. We imagine that the audience for these reports is within your work unit, but also more broadly, it's something that we hope will have resonance with upper management. And so clearly, if there are things that could be in these reports that you believe might make that more effective for you or more descriptive, we'd be very pleased to hear about that. So one thing, I don't know if any of you have availed yourself of this, but you'll also find when you do the submission that you'll get access to a CSV file that you can download. And that is basically a CSV file with one row in it. It'll be the row containing the data from that individual assessment. Now, on its own, it's actually not a hell of a lot of value to you, but the intention is that when you do an assessment, you get the CSV file. Over time, when you build up similar assessments, either across a bunch of business units, or when you do repeat assessments of the same unit or the same system over time, you can actually then combine those CSV files and do your own analysis on them to see change over time. And if you're doing that, we'd love to hear about it, but equally it's there for you, and we hope it'll be quite useful to you. One of the things that you may encounter as you use it more broadly is that the way the registration for the RKAT system is set up is that when you register using your email address, and so you're the one who gets the reports, the access to the reports. If you've been doing the program for a while, you might find that staff move in and out of that work area. You might actually find that they leave the organisation and go somewhere else. Now, once their email address is retired, it no longer works for anybody else, so nobody else is able to access those things. Our expectation is that progressively the organisation would be, the users would be downloading those reports and CSV files and putting them somewhere within the organisation's information system. And so ultimately they wouldn't be sitting in someone's private folder. But we understand that the case is that this isn't always the case. If you have been investing a bit of time in using the RKAT and getting the benefit of it, and you believe you've accumulated enough reports that you actually do want to start doing some analysis of your own, get in touch with us, because if you're a real person and a legitimate person from your organisation, then we'll go in the back end and we can extract the reports, the CSV files, for example, submitted by anybody from your organisation that you can then use for your modelling. Okay, clearly we do our due diligence on these sorts of things, so we don't give the information out to anyone. But ultimately, if you've got a legitimate reason for getting access to these things, we can actually go back and retrospectively provide this information to you after a bit of a conversation. But yeah, so by all means do that. We understand that that's a potential concern that you might have over time, where you lose access to these things, but there are two ways you can still deal with them. Okay, and lastly, this is a piece of work that we're really interested in. It's something that we've had in place in the planning from the very outset, was that when a sector or a group of organisations had compiled collectively enough assessments to make it of interest to them to do some comparisons. Perhaps if you're in an industry or a particular area where you think it might be valuable to do a bit of benchmarking, then we're really keen for you to do that. We'd strongly encourage that kind of collaboration. And by all means, please get in touch with us, because we're very interested in supporting that kind of work. Now, what we're doing to that end is we're building essentially a basic framework, a fairly generic framework at this stage, but the idea is we can identify a group of organisations. If a group of organisations wants to have some comparative work done, they just all need to get in touch with us and confirm that they'd like to do it, and then we can work with them on generating a report for you. So the idea would be we can produce some perhaps meaningful plots for you, so you can actually see where the middle is, and you can then refer back to your own results and do the comparative stuff to see perhaps where you sit on some of these things. But beyond that, we think that would be useful. But also beyond that, if you actually have some specific inclusions in there that you think would be really informative, any particular descriptive data or summary stats that you'd like to see, you should by all means get in touch with us, because we can perhaps accommodate that. So the framework's fairly flexible, but if you believe you are at the point, or you plan to be at that point in the near future, where a group of you might want to start doing some benchmarking or comparison, please get in touch, because we can start to think about what your needs might be and incorporate them into this output framework, and that'll come out to you as a Word doc, so you can then do further editing on it. And so that's that. That's a bit of a speed run through. As I said, if you want to know a bit more about the RKAT, you can go back and look at the previous RMN presentations. Equally, if you're setting out in this journey, if you like, of assessing your performance, you can always just get in touch with us, and we might be able to do something one-on-one with you to give you a bit of a tour. And that's it from me. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Peter. And I noticed there's a few questions for you in the Q&A.
Ooh. Let me have a look.
Okay, our final speaker today is Leigh Kinrade. Leigh is the Coordinator Statewide Collections at PROV, and he's going to give us an update on our Places of Deposit program. So welcome, Leigh. You might have to unmute.
Thanks, Justine. Sorry about that. Thanks, everyone, for having me today to discuss PROV's Place of Deposit program. So Places of Deposit, or PODs, include a range of historical societies, museums, genealogical organisations across all of Victoria who have been appointed to hold public records as part of their collection. PROV works closely with these organisations to support them in caring for their public records, providing access to them, and approving the transfer of public records into their collections. This is a really important way, we feel, that gives records a new life. They're basically kept in the communities where they were created and had effect over. This statewide network is growing very steadily. To visualise this, if that wants to work. This is basically just a map plotting the places of deposits across Victoria. It's important to note there are two different types of places of deposit. There's Class A pods and Class B pods. Class A pods are appointed to hold permanent and temporary records, whereas Class B pods are appointed to hold temporary records only. Some of the Class A pods, we have the Geelong Heritage Centre, University of Melbourne Archives, Bendigo Regional Archives Centre, and the Burke Museum in Beechworth. Class B pods, there's about 96 across the rest of Victoria. As Alison mentioned before, PROV has developed new specifications for both Class A and Class B pods. The Class A specification is very rigorous just because they can hold those permanent public records in their collection. The Class B specification, we want it to be more accessible for community groups to meet without putting any of their collection material at risk. Once a pod's been approved, they need to provide a biannual attestation that's showing that they still meet the standards and nothing's changed within their organisation, and they might put those records at risk. We're constantly appointing new pods. You can jump on our website and have a look at a full list here to see which is the nearest pod to you if you may be interested in transferring some records to them. If you want any further information on the pod program, you can definitely jump through our website. You can contact me through there, or if you have any questions now, feel free to throw them in the Q&A and we can answer after the presentation. That was just a brief overview of the pod program. Thanks for having me, and I'll jump out.
Thanks, Leigh. And if there are any questions for Leigh, you can pop them into the Q&A. I note there are still a couple of questions in there, which I think are in the process of being answered. You can also contact the presenters directly on the emails that have been shared, and of course contact us at PROV as well if there are any other questions that we can answer for you. So that actually concludes today's presentation. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers for presenting today, and I look forward to seeing you all again at a future Records Management Network event. Thank you everyone for coming.